Can they hear from out there or? Okay. Right, everybody, it's about in a few seconds we're going to start, so please take your seats. And those coming in, welcome, thank you. The main thing is, do we have our panelists? It's hard to start without your panelists. Okay, well, welcome, and firstly, just thank all of you who have stayed the very, very last event of a really exciting 3 days. And we hope that this will leave you with a bit of a buzz and some things to think about as you leave. And this is our session on a climate smart pathway for the BBNJ. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Matt Frost. I head up the international work for Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the UK. I'm also, as Alison alluded to, chair of the UK National Decade Committee for the Ocean Decade. And I also chair the Marine Climate Change Impact Partnership, which is a government advisory body on climate change. So I'm really excited about this. I think it's a really good topic, and we've got a really good panel. We've heard a session already on the importance of climate change in the BBNJ. Particularly, I won't go through it. We're going to have a high-level address shortly from Regina Rodriguez. But we've heard that climate change is quite key to the BBNJ, and particularly in the Article 7, it talks about building ecosystem resilience, including to the adverse effects of climate change. And this session is very much focused on one of the tools for addressing that. And specifically, Pillar 2 of the BBNJ is all about area-based management tools. Measures such as ABMTs, including marine protected areas. So that's going to be our focus today. It will be relevant to the whole of the BBNJ, but we do want to focus on ABMTs. The other thing to mention is that what we're going to be hearing today is a lot of really good tools and concepts that have been developed and very well developed at the national level. And the big question is, can we scale these approaches up and apply them in the areas beyond national jurisdiction within the context of the BBNJ? So I'm not going to say any more because we have a really fantastic panel. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, for the panel that are here in person, could you please come and join me on the stage and take these seats here? And while they're coming up, I'm going to... Hello? Oh, it's back. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who we've already heard from as a panelist in this event. So our first speaker is Professor Regina Rodriguez from the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil. And she's a permanent member of the Brazilian Interministerial Committee for Climate Change and chair of the subsection on climate disasters of the REED CLIMA, among others. I'm not going to read all your titles if that's all right, because it will take too long. But yeah, we're really delighted that you're able to come and give us a high-level opening address for this event. So over to you. Thank you. Oh, yes, no, that's a good point. I do want to say, as with all the sessions, thank you for the reminder, Hermione, that we will have Slido. So as we're going along, because I know what it's like, you get a question, you forget it an hour later. So please put your questions on Slido as we go along, and we'll get to them because there will be time for Q&A in this session. So, and there we go, there's the Slido code. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I would like to thank the organized committee of this side event, particularly Matt, for the invitation. Matt asked me to talk about the governance of ocean climate change impacts nationally, internationally. And in this context, I will answer the question, what can we learn from Brazil governance for the BBNJ implementation, considering our last COP 30 here in Brazil, and all that Brazil did at this during the COP for the ocean. So my first, I'm not too sure if I have the. Oh, sorry, I didn't see this. Right, thanks. So, okay, so a few things that I wanted to say. The first one will be six kind of things that I brought it. The first one is the blue ocean as a strategy frame device. So what I'm going to say, what we did, and what I think can be contributed to BBNJ. So Brazil brands its ocean as the blue Amazon, and so this political frame has been enormously effective. It links ocean governance to national identity and sovereignty in a way that generates domestic political buy-in that a more technical language never could. So the lesson to the BBNJ is that the agreement still lacks a compelling popular identity, in my opinion, and countries and civil society working on implementation should invest in resonant national framing, connecting the high seas to food security, culture, heritage, and economic futures, as Brazil has done with its EEZ and the labeling of Blue Amazon. So the second point is the collective action as a governance design, what we call the Mutirão Azul, and the accountability through the Blue Package. At COP30, Brazil elevated the ocean to central climate pillar through the Blue Package and the concept of a Mutirão. I'm not going to read what it means, but Brazil reinforced this approach by joining the ocean panel and committing to sustainable manage all national waters by 2030. And by integrating ocean measures into the NDCs for the first time through the Blue NDC Challenge. So the COP30 Blue Package defined 5 ocean breakthroughs, which is depicted in this slide. I'm not reading because I have short time to do that, but with science-based targets and an online platform to track progress. So the BBNJ lesson would be COPs should function as a coordinated implementation platform, not only negotiation forums as COPs being done in previously, which it wastes a little bit of time. So and this is mirroring the COP's 30 action agenda model. COP1 should establish then transparent tracking system for MPA's proposal and EIAs and capacity building support, strengthening accountability and public trust. So the third lesson, I think, from COP is that the Blue NEDC framework demonstrates political and technical feasibility for integrating ocean action into climate planning. Yet ocean mitigation still represents a small share of NDC's content. It's only 1% actually in the NDCs of the countries. So the lesson COP1 should formally encourage parts to reflect on BBNJ MPA's commitments and EIA outcomes in the NDCs of the parties, creating an institutional bridge between BNG and UNFCCC. So, and the fourth point is the marine spatial planning progress with structure limits. So in June 2025, Brazil adopted a national MSP framework via decree number, whatever the number is, the decree, it doesn't matter, and launched a 4-region planning model coordinated by the Interministerial Commission for Marine Resource. And we start with the Southern Pilot. So going to what lesson we could learn from this is regionalized MSPs, use this model and share spatial infrastructure, which would be directly applied to BNG's EIAs. And But formal standards will require substantial implementation support to become operational. So we don't think that one model will be adequate for the whole region, but we could use a regionalized instead approach. And the fifth one is indigenous people from participation to co-governance. And COP30 significantly expand indigenous participation and formally recognize indigenous rights and knowledge across multiple outcome documents. So the lesson for BBNJ, that governance should move beyond general participation clause by establishing a funded indigenous and local community advisory body, particularly for EIAs and MPAs designation. And last, fragmentation remains the core challenge. Despite a high level of ambition, Brazil's ocean governance remains fragmented across sectors and institutions. MSPs provide the framework, but not yet integrated management. So the lesson is, without an explicitly coordination mandate, BBNJ risks replicating this fragmentation globally. And the scientific and technical body must be empowered to coordinate across ocean-related regimes from COP1 onwards. So then I stop here. I don't want to take any more time.
Thank you, Regina. That was a really fantastic opening. And I have to say, if that becomes the blueprint for the BBNJ and the first COP, then I think we're doing really well. And one of the things I really wanted to pick up on what you said, I mean, I could repeat everything because it was really interesting, but I loved the whole idea of starting to have an action COP straight away. I know I won't say, but other conventions spent years negotiating and then decided, 20 years down the line, let's have an implementation one instead. To actually set off to say we're going to have action and implementation at the heart of the whole process straight away. I thought that was great. So thank you so much. Okay, we're going to keep moving because I do want to have time for questions. So what I'm going to do is introduce I'm not going to choose all the panel. I'm going to introduce the panel one by one. But our next speaker should be online, I believe. So could I ask if Dr. Fanny Duver is online?
Yes, I'm online. Nice
fantastic. Thank you. In that case, I can say it now. We're honoured to have Dr. Fanny Duver from the IOC, who's the Sustainable Ocean Planning and Management Lead and a global expert in ocean conservation and World Heritage Management. So thank you for joining us, and over to you, Fanny. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think the slides, they are there. Can you see them? Yes.
Yes, we can see those, yeah.
And I think I cannot move the slides apparently. Yeah, thank you. So obviously, first of all, thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to share a few thoughts. There's obviously different ways that you can approach this topic that was given to me for participating in this panel. But I thought in the limited amount of time that was available to give a bit of a snapshot of what it actually really would take to have a climate smart focus on area-based management, and of course with that the tools and the processes that we have available to implement that area-based management. And in our case at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, our focus is, in addition to marine spatial planning, now very much on sustainable ocean planning, and I'll talk you through some of those differences. But when I started out with preparing for this talk, I think it's good to kind of take a step back and look at what the different aspects are that we perhaps also want to avoid in the high seas when we're now going to implement the treaty and start, for example, set up marine protected areas. When you look at areas within national jurisdiction, as we all know, only about 8% is protected today. Actually, scientific research shows quite clearly that over half of these marine protected areas fall outside of the globally identified biodiversity priority areas, meaning that there's a huge gap between where science tells us that marine protected areas should be located and what then actually is done in practice. So a very first aspect when we really want to look at climate smart area-based management under the High Seas Treaty, we got to protect what is actual, we need to protect the areas that actually matter most. And that might sound straightforward, but as we see in areas within national jurisdiction, that's actually very much not being done. And of course, when it comes to climate, that's particularly important for carbon sinks and blue carbon assets. Now, with that, of course, and again, that's not something that is new. We all know that the majority of MPAs still permit widespread habitat extraction, fisheries is going on, all sorts of other activities are going on. And that means that when you want to protect these areas and the species within these areas against, from the impacts of climate change, that even within the areas that we're trying to protect, these species cannot really withstand those threats. Climate change is very much a threat that comes on top of a lot of other pressures as well. So when you have a marine protected area that has widespread habitat extraction, it is simply not possible for the ecosystem and the species within it to really be protected from climate change. And just looking at tuna, for example, more than 70% of the tuna is caught in high seas areas. So it is quite critical that we avoid also that second component. A third aspect that is very clear in the scientific literature is that there's a number of indications now that the areas that have high biodiversity, so biodiversity hotspots, that they actually seem to be warming faster today than some of the surrounding areas around those biodiversity hotspots. And in the literature, it's referred to as anti-refugia, because we might be thinking that by concentrating on good protection in biodiversity hotspots, we have a critical step forward in protecting species and ecosystems from climate change. But the reality is actually we're not protecting these surrounding areas and these buffer zones, and look at the connectivity across that we quite clearly miss the boat. And that's research that has been published and is becoming quite confirmed on that particular point. And the last point that is something that is also very often not necessarily looked at closely in areas within national jurisdiction, that is that we must take depth seriously when we talk about planning and management of biodiversity, especially in a climate context. There is scientific research that indicates that there's not only the surface temperature, for example, that is warming, there's also aspects and critical threats that are operating in the water column and at seafloor that, especially when it comes to acidification, for example, that squeezes species in increasingly smaller areas where they actually can survive and thrive. So taking depth with us in the planning and management aspects when we look at climate smart area-based management is critically important as well, and not something that we necessarily are attuned to do in areas within national jurisdiction. The next slide, please. So above and beyond all of that, when you look at the reports of the OECD about the projections of our ocean economy, then the ocean economy is actually projected to grow 4 times larger by 2050, so in another good 20 years from now, 25 years from now, than it was in 1995. And that's in part through emerging sectors such as marine biotechnology, deep sea mining, and also just technological advances that allow us to go consistently deeper, consistently further in our human activities. And that, of course, is a shift that you will see quite significantly as well in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And a good aspect, of course, of the treaty is the regime that it will set in place, or is setting in place, the regime for environmental impact assessments. Now, the idea behind the environmental impact assessment regime is, of course, that it brings also transparency and data in addition to bringing a regulatory framework for the private sector and private investment. But that might mean also that this transparency of data for environmental impact assessments accelerate also what actually is available in the high seas, and increase the understanding, and with that also increase economic activity. So you're taking the aspects around biodiversity, and especially the climate aspects around biodiversity protection, you take that together with the economic development, then, and next slide please, then you can quite clearly see the critical need for having a very comprehensive management framework. When you look at what is happening right now in research, especially, also projects that are being set up in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas, it is already becoming quite significantly fragmented. It's quite regional. There's focuses on certain things, but not on others. There's a whole range of institutions as well that will need to cooperate with one another in order to have a holistic approach. And then there's, of course, also the interface between the national, what is happening nationally, what is happening in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And these management measures need to overlap in order to bring the kind of consistent management approach that is needed. So we at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission have signed, or our member states have adopted a new strategy for what is called sustainable ocean planning and management. So it is in essence a holistic umbrella framework that allows to bring all of those different ocean-related policies, governance, tools, mechanisms, aspects, and processes basically that we go through, such as marine spatial planning, to align that and to bring that together, and to make sure that this translates in a longer-term vision for what we actually want to do in those areas. And if we go to the next slide, of course, bringing with all of that together the biodiversity aspects with the climate aspects, but also allow a sustainable economic development. So to conclude, when you would develop a climate smart, sustainable ocean planning and management, it would actually have to do 4 critical things, and probably other aspects as well, but at least 4 that are quite clear and straightforward. It would, in the very first place, need to be a way to provide decision makers, and especially all the different organizations that will be implicated in managing the high seas, to provide them with the evidence base, and with a comprehensive evidence base that allows very clearly to identify what needs to be designated as area-based management areas, as marine protected areas, and where it will have the greatest impact. Again, it sounds straightforward, but in reality, you can see already in the areas that we've been having marine protected areas for over 50 years, actually, we're not doing that, and over half of them are not in the right location. So we would need to find a way to work across countries and across geographies in order to look comprehensively at the areas beyond national jurisdiction and identify what should be protected. We also need to very clearly plan for connectivity and not just look at current distribution. And again, something that is not easily done, but we need to make sure, if we look at climate smart, sustainable ocean planning and management, we need to make sure that the network of MPAs is a dynamic system that will retain its ecological coherence as the ocean conditions are changing. And obviously, some of these conditions we can do something about, but some of these conditions, such as acidification, at the end of the day, that's just something that can only be really regulated when fossil fuels use goes down. So it is a very different kind of aspect of managing high seas areas. A very important point that, again, we do not do very much in areas within national jurisdiction, but which is hugely important, is to embed those climate projections in the planning and management that we do. And again, the sustainable ocean planning and management would allow to actually do that, to systematically incorporate sea surface temperatures, for example, to look at trends, to look at climate scenarios under the IPCC scenarios, and essentially start to make sure that every decision we take when it comes to area-based management decisions, to make sure that it gets evaluated on a 20, 50, or maybe even 100-time horizon. And in a climate change context, that's critical and indispensable. We cannot plan just for today. We got to plan for the future and be proactive in that. And lastly, it would be important, of course, also to look at climate vulnerability, do the assessment, and use that kind of climate assessment vulnerability to prioritize of what actually will be protected, and to have some kind of, whether it's a scoring system or something else, but really look at areas that are perhaps most exposed to warming, acidification, and all sorts of other aspects that are touching, that climate change is affecting when it comes to species and ecosystems. So there's a whole range that comes into play. And while we might be, of course, and should be looking at marine spatial planning would only be one component. It wouldn't be able to actually deal with all of these different aspects of this problem. And I have a last slide, and that will be the end of my talk. And that is, next slide, please. So as I said earlier, can I have the next slide, please? As I said earlier, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission has adopted last year a sustainable ocean planning and management strategy for the next 5 years. It is focused in large measure to areas within national jurisdiction, but it has very much also the same principles that can be applied in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and especially also to make sure that there is this coherence. And the mission of the strategy is essentially to support every decision maker within nations to implement, to be able to actually have the tools available to develop a sustainable ocean plan, facilitate particularly the uptake of data, and develop knowledge products that can strengthen the capacities of decision makers to actually do this kind of work and tackle that. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Fanny. And I'm one of the lead experts on the high-level panel, so I'm a huge fan of the sustainable ocean planning, and I'm really excited to see this start to roll out. I loved your point. Wouldn't it be radical if marine protected areas actually protected the areas? I think that was a really good point you made there as well, but I'm sure we'll come back to some of it. We're running slightly over, so I'm going to keep moving on. So our next speaker, who is here in person, I'm delighted to say, is one of my colleagues as well, I'm also delighted to say, is Professor Anna Kiros from Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and where Anna is the climate change lead and an internationally recognized leader in climate smart management of ocean ecosystems. So over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks to the organizers for allowing us to have this side event to focus on climate change in the Museum of Tomorrow, and that's really what we're talking about today. The ocean of tomorrow is not the ocean we see today. Species are moving, habitats are moving, and so that leaves us and those tasked with making decisions about where we will place our conservation efforts in the open ocean with the task of facilitating that change, really. So climate change makes, in essence, any preservation objectives very difficult, very challenging. And so what we are left with is recognizing and allowing for that change in the natural system in order to enable to protect the biodiversity. And so based on my work and who I'm representing today, so the ICES Working Group on Marine Planning and Coastal Zone Management, ICES being the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, so the oldest intergovernmental science organization which has been providing advice to the European countries and countries along the Western Atlantic region for a long time. And in fact, you heard from our president, Carl O'Brien, in panel 5. So in ICES, we have been looking at this task very carefully. ICES has many working groups which are composed of practitioners and scientists and others who come together to discuss both the needs at the policy end, as well as what is the novel science and how can science help steer that delivery of policy. And we have been looking also at the BBNJ agreement, and we think there are lessons that can be learned from how we're looking at climate-smart ocean management within national jurisdictions that can really facilitate and accelerate the tasks that we've put on ourselves to protect biodiversity in the areas beyond national jurisdiction and allow for their sustainable use. So I have two main comments that I'd like to make in this intervention. So the first one is that by working with practitioners, it is very clear that what we need is not just, the leading evidence about climate change impacts in our natural environment, in our natural world. Decision makers need a lot more information to be able to be persuaded that that's the right thing to consider, that is equally important as people's livelihoods, as economic development, as cultural heritage. And so what we have found through co-development activities in member states to ICES and working not just at the national level but at international collaboration, what we find is that it's these decision support tools that bring together this natural sciences evidence about climate change effects, about identifying opportunity as well as impact. And so it's by looking at scenario planning, looking at the economic effects of particular alternatives. For example, if we think about ABMT siting, so the siting of area-based management tools, if we think particularly about the BBNJ agreement, is thinking about the economic effects of different alternatives, how that will affect the revenue, the gross value added of the adjacent blue economies of the countries that explore these areas, as well as how do those decisions align with the values of those who depend on those areas, be that culturally or economically. So it's only when we are able to bring these three lines of evidence together that policymakers tend to be persuaded that this is something that they need, that they must consider on parity with other issues that they need to consider, particularly in the economic and social sphere. And delivering that, as been mentioned today, can only be done through co-development. That's really integrated work between scientists and decision makers, practitioners, and civil society. So that's one of the things that we want to propose and encourage as we deliver the BBNJ. So making sure that these decision support tools are not just focused on the key evidence that we need around the changes in the marine environment, but also about economy and society. So that means we need to think about who will compose the STB, what are the expertise that we're going to need there, but also there are many people in the national jurisdictions that have this experience with multilateralism, with working within the industry, with marine sectors, with private sector, that can bring that experience to the BBNJ and help support and accelerate its delivery. The second part goes really, my second comment to this community is really about what aspects of climate change we are considering, particularly in the siting of the area-based management tools. And so I was really encouraged to see the work of all the colleagues that have advised the process here too, in particular to see that Annex 1 on the criteria for selection of sites already includes climate change vulnerability. I just wanted to add again some experience that we've learned from the national contexts about how to implement climate-smart approaches to ocean management. So one of the things that we tend to contend with is this view that reducing human activity will necessarily increase resilience to climate change. Now, we have plenty of evidence from around the world that that's not always the case, in fact. So reducing human activity will only increase in climate resilience for nature in some cases. And so we need careful consideration in proposals for ABMT siting about whether the sites we are considering will actually allow biodiversity to thrive in the near future. And without those considerations, we are really not putting our eggs in the correct basket. So it'll be a great effort to deliver these ABMTs. We need to make sure that we're investing in the right areas. So consideration of climate change vulnerability is one aspect. But I would like to add that there's two more other aspects to climate change that will really be necessary to ensure we meet the ambition, particularly outlined in Article 7, which sets out the general direction for the BBNJ agreement. So in particular, it's not just about vulnerability, it's also about opportunity and resilience. And so equally important to knowing where are the vulnerable areas, we also need to think about what are the resilient areas. So where are the areas where nature is most likely to thrive, to continue to thrive into the medium and the long-term future. And those areas provide the best chance for nature to continue as is now. So if we want to protect particular species, particular features of habitats, we need to think about where are the areas that are ecologically and biologically significant, but also whether those areas are resilient to climate change. So we'd like to suggest that climate resilience should also be a specific consideration in site selection. And lastly, just a reminder that climate smart approaches are not just looking at adaptation in nature, they're also looking at mitigation. The ocean is our greatest ally in the fight against climate change, in reducing carbon emissions. And that, so my comment is not MCDR, it's not about technology, it's about protecting the role that the ocean has been delivering for us, that service of climate regulation for millions of years. And Article 7 does mention that these areas where we place ABMTs should also protect ecosystem integrity and the capacity of the ocean to regulate our climate. And that is currently not considered in Annex 1 in site selection. So I think we do have work to do at the PrepCom, at COP1, and I'm really counting on this community to continue to to put across that message and allow for the clearinghouse mechanism to incorporate those dimensions as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anna. And I've had the privilege of working with Anna for many years on some of this, and in particular, what's fascinated me is at the national level in the UK, as soon as people have understood what this approach is and seen the value of it, the uptake has been really good. Actually, it's been actually operationalized already in, I'm saying that word, there you go, I can say it as well, operationalized in a lot of the sort of policies and plans coming up now in the UK. So I'm sure Anna would be delighted to talk to you about that. And if we can get this in the ABMT, then that would be, into the BBNJ, that would be fantastic as well. I'm going to keep us moving on, as I said, because I do want to make sure we've got time for questions. So hopefully now online we have Dr. Kira G. Kira, are you online? Ah, excellent.
I am indeed. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you. I won't ask what time it is there. I dread to think, but thank you so much for joining us online. And I'll just quickly just say that Kira is a co-chair of the ICES Working Group on Marine Planning and Coastal Zone Management, and an internationally recognised expert in human perceptions of values associated with the sea and the emergence of energy seascapes. So we're really grateful you could join us, Kira, and over to you for your intervention. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And one of the advantages of going third or fourth in a panel is that a lot of the things I'm going to say have already been said, in fact. So I'm also going to be speaking with my ICES hat on today as a representative of the Working Group on Marine Planning and Coastal Zone Management. And specifically, as Anna has mentioned already, we have a term of reference that looks at delivering climate change action through marine spatial planning. And a lot of work has already been done on that term of reference, and is one that we are taking forward into the next 3-year period as well. So speaking briefly to you from the perspective of an MSP person, which is my area of expertise, and I thought I'd bring some lessons that we think have been learned at national level from marine spatial planning, conception and implementation in Europe, but also, of course, in other places. And the question is, how can we maybe apply some of these lessons to climate smart approaches in the high seas and in BBNJ contexts? So I thought it might be worth repeating a little bit what marine spatial planning actually is. It's a national approach in most cases, but also subnational in some countries. It's a holistic approach and, above all, a strategic process which is guided by high-level policy goals. And those can be, of course, national, but also international policy goals. And in these bullets, you see some of the commonly recognized key features, I guess, that MSP nowadays has. So marine spatial planning tends to be ecosystem-based, or at least has the ambition to be ecosystem-based. It's an evidence-based approach that really focuses a lot on data, science, knowledge coming from different stakeholders, from different sources. It's a collaborative endeavor. It's adaptive, which means it goes through cycles, planning cycles. So where you sort of plan, then implement, evaluate, and then adapt. And it's an approach that is very much based on coherence. And coherence means different things. It means policy coherence, and the previous speakers have already alluded to the importance of that. But also spatial coherence because, well, of course, we all know, just because we have plans in place at a national level, that does not necessarily match ecosystems or ecosystem boundaries. So the transboundary element has actually turned out to be very crucial, certainly in Europe, in the North Sea, for example, in the Mediterranean, in the Baltic Sea, where lots of different countries somehow have to come up with a coherent approach to managing those sea basins and also to managing the spatial elements of that marine area. So collaboration across sea basins is important, and that in turn requires a political commitment on the one hand, but also capacity at various levels. Can I move that on? Yes. It's worth highlighting that marine spatial planning has also given us something else that I think is important and very relevant when it comes to the high seas, which is to see marine spaces as cultural spaces, as relational spaces. These are spaces that we all, as humans, have a relation with in some way or another. So these are spaces, really, when you think about it, where different values, multiple values collide, sometimes contradict one another. And here I'm talking about material, tangible values, things that get translated into economic values, into jobs, so the stuff that has to do with maybe the resources that we take from the sea. But there's also immaterial values, relationships, meaning that we derive from the ocean, meaning that we derive from using the ocean, from living with the ocean, living in the ocean, on the ocean. And of course, spaces, marine spaces, bring multiple benefits to different stakeholders, to various communities. There's conflicts that sometimes pop up, and that means that there are trade-off decisions that have to be made, which then brings us to the importance of how these decisions are made and how we actually ensure that there's a fair process behind them. Now, when we talk about climate change and climate change impact, it's also clear already that the values and the benefits that accrue to different people and societies are going to shift. It's very obvious already when you look at the distribution of fisheries resources. That will have an impact on coastal communities, but also maybe countries or economies at large. There are two more points that are worth highlighting and lessons that we have learned from marine spatial planning. One is that marine spatial planning is most successful, maybe even only successful, when it actually gives practical and tangible benefits to stakeholders. And Anna has mentioned something very similar. It has to actually translate into something that makes sense to policymakers in order to actually implement this. And that actually also applies to the high seas, even though there are challenges and specific challenges in those spaces that are different also to the EEZs or coastal waters. So what specifically can MSP offer to the high seas context? And again, I want to specifically focus on the climate-smart MSP approaches, which require us to actually broaden the strategic elements and also the collaborative dimensions of planning. And that's actually even more relevant in the high seas, not least because enforcement might be more challenging, but also because it might be harder to actually get a grasp of what these spaces, these areas actually really mean. So balancing interests across temporal and spatial scales is an ongoing process, and that is certainly a lesson we're learning in MSP at the moment in Europe. Change is not only happening in the ocean, it's happening at political levels, in the economies and in society. The importance of commitment has already been highlighted. I want to add to that the importance of collaborative spaces where you can have stakeholder representation, where you can have stakeholder recognition, where there is an option for designing fair processes and where there is a real option to actually co-design the outcomes of planning. It's very, very important to include diverse information and knowledge bases, including also sector knowledge. And it is equally important to link all this to a strategic vision And that can be connected to future scenarios, again, in the context of climate change, very important. Anna has already said it, we need to know how these spaces might change and might develop, where the challenges are, but also where the opportunities might lie. And I believe it's also worth pointing out the value of working with the social sciences to understand how change actually flows from the environment through our socioeconomic realm to people and humans and their well-being. And that includes understanding the impacts of climate change effects on the value bases that we have in our societies and our economies. I think that's all I want to say, and I'm happy to carry on these points in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kira. And another really great talk there. And one thing I particularly liked there was if we get the collaboration and the buy-in and everybody realizes the benefits of protection very early on within that climate smart thinking, that actually helps with enforcement because people are already bought into it. And I think that's a really great point and one that I've not heard made yet. So thank you very much for that. That was great. As I said, we'll pick some of those things up in the discussion. So our penultimate speaker is Christine Buenafe. I hope I pronounced that right. Can I just find out if Christine's with us?
Yes, you're pronouncing it perfectly.
Oh, excellent. And great. I believe it's good morning to you. Is that correct? So.
Yes, it's 6 a.m. in Brisbane right now.
Oh my gosh, right, okay. Well, doubly thank you for joining us for this panel. So Christine is an internationally recognized expert in climate smart marine protected area design and works with the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. So we're delighted to have you with us, Christine, and over to you for your intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Hopefully everyone can see the slides.
Yes, we can see those, yeah.
Thank you. So today I am part of DOSI. I've also entered for the High Seas Alliance and I'm working really closely with the IUCN High Seas Specialist Group, but I will be putting on my University of Queensland hat today and will be talking about mainly my research, which bridges the gap between climate change ecology and actionable conservation planning, specifically incorporating climate projections in how we design marine protected areas. So a lot of the insights that I will be talking about today stems from our research that was synthesized in this Nature Review's biodiversity review, but also from the work that our team has been doing at UQ in supporting marine spatial planning work in the Pacific, as well as conservation planning in the Southern Ocean. So I might be preaching to the choir here, but we know that climate change and biodiversity loss are two global problems that are deeply intertwined, where failure to address one exacerbates the impacts of the other. Climate change is already impacting our ecosystems globally, not only in the marine realm, but also terrestrially, causing shifting species distributions, disrupting ecological communities, and causing local extirpations, especially for species and communities with nowhere else to go. We also know that area-based management tools, such as marine protected areas, are critical to reducing biodiversity loss. However, climate change has been reducing the effectiveness of protected areas to safeguard biodiversity, where species found within the boundaries of these protected areas are forced to adapt to the rapidly changing conditions, move outside of the boundaries of these protected areas, and if they can't do either of these, then they die. And so there has been a continuously accelerating push to more explicitly incorporate climate change in the way we think about conservation. And tackling the biodiversity and climate crisis is actually apparent across a lot of global goals and commitments. So for example, the UNFCCC's Paris Climate Agreement's goal to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increases to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. From the more conservation side of things, this is also apparent across a lot of global biodiversity framework targets, particularly Target 1, to plan and manage all areas to reduce biodiversity loss. Target 3, also known as 30 by 30, to conserve 30% of land, waters, and seas. And Target 8, to minimize impacts of climate change on biodiversity and build resilience. So these different global goals and commitments present an opportunity for climate smart conservation planning. Specifically, when we look at the 30 by 30 target, for the marine realm, we actually need to increase our protection or protected area coverage by 4-fold to reach 30% by 2030. And now that the BBNJ agreement has been entered into force, we will now have a mechanism to conserve and sustainably use more than half of our planet and more than 60% of our global oceans. And so this conservation gap, as we move towards more protected areas and more protection, presents an opportunity for us to design and implement marine protected areas that are climate smart from the outset. And in this work, in our work, we've identified 4 different approaches that we can incorporate climate change in designing marine protected areas. So firstly, through looking at protecting the future habitats of species, through prioritizing the protection of more stable areas like climate refugia, incorporating climate connectivity, so how connectivity could change with climate change, and also looking to protect areas with high adaptation potential, so maybe more resilient to climate change. And we found that among all of these 4 approaches, no single climate smart approach can adequately account for all of the effects of climate change on all species and ecosystems found within an area. And so we actually need to incorporate multiple approaches, and potentially bet hedging strategies could increase the likelihood that a climate smart protected area will effectively mitigate climate risk. We also did this review, not just in the marine realm, but also in the terrestrial realm to learn more about how it's being done in the terrestrial realm. And we found that biases in biodiversity also exist when you're looking at climate smart spatial prioritizations, where most of these studies are actually done in the terrestrial realm more than the marine realm, and use species-specific information when designing climate-smart marine protected areas. So we suggest that the exchange of ideas across realms can accelerate the development of climate-smart approaches and encourage a more holistic approach to conservation planning. We also need to accelerate the development of approaches that can be applicable to data poor regions. As I mentioned, most of these approaches require species-specific information, and data poor regions may not have the access to this species-specific information. And this is really exhibited in the high seas as well in the global south. In climate-smart conservation planning, uncertainty remains to be one of the biggest barriers to the uptake of these approaches. However, uncertainty should not be an excuse for inaction. Instead, it should be properly incorporated in decision-making through scenario planning and the such. So I would like to end this to say that it is false pretense to think that we cannot design and implement climate-smart marine protected areas, because we can. And we already have the approaches to do these. We just really need to translate what we know from the scientific literature into actionable and tangible conservation planning approaches that can be applied on the ground. And I will end my talk there, and happy to answer questions later, and excited to participate in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And that was, I love the comprehensive nature of that talk. You talked about, you brought in the terrestrial angle, you linked it to the UNFCCC. So I think that's really important that we don't just think and discuss these things in silos. And you're a really good example of somebody who's not doing that. So that was fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will follow up by reading your paper. Okay, this is our final talk before we move on to a discussion. So I want to introduce Andre, which I just want to say Andre because everybody knows you now, Andre. But I came across Andre a few years ago when I was writing an opinion piece for a journal on science diplomacy, and it was the first thing I'd written on science diplomacy, and I thought, oh, nobody's really doing ocean diplomacy, so I Googled it, and Andre, Poljak just kept coming up. So it's clearly your passion. So yeah, I will just say, Director of INPO, expert in ocean diplomacy and other things, but you all know Andre now. So we're really delighted that you're actually the, in fact, it's quite apt that you're the final speaker of this whole conference. I think that is really, we didn't plan that, it just kind of happened. So that's great. So over to you, Andre, and please for your intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody who has resisted such as us until this time. And of course, I would like to thank the organizers of this event. So yeah, it is a passion of mine, and I'm really, really glad that I had the chance to speak by myself now and not as organizer, because this goes dear into my heart. And the first thing is that we have a climate regime, and we have an ocean regime, but we also have a biodiversity regime, and we have all the regimes, but we still have a warming planet, we still have biodiversity laws, we still have pollution, but we have everything written down. Those are rules, we're all abide to those, but we're not getting anywhere, or it's very slow, the pace. So now we have another rule. Thank you. Fabio, don't cut me. So now we finally have another rule of a big void into the ocean governance, which is the areas that are not belonging to anybody, but not the seafloor, just the water, right? So now we have the rules for the water. And as in everything else in ocean governance, in all global commons, climate, ocean, space, the internet, and now artificial intelligence, those are all global commons. In all of those, we have very specific rules because we don't want to destroy the planet. But we're not saving the planet neither. So what's going on? We have the data, we have the papers published, everything's there, so what is missing? And I tell you, ocean science diplomacy looks at the processes, not at the causes and consequences, but tries to understand why and the process by which we do that. And many times we forgot about the people. So Kira, thank you very much when you brought the people up, because for scholars like me, it's all about the people. It's not about the institutions. The institutions are there. The papers are written. We have the rules, but we still have the people. And this species has not been very successful. We are good survivors because of our own fate. We are making this happen, but we are not saving ourselves. Now, why is that? There are many, many people, wonderful people, who actually studies this and publishes this. So for instance, marine biodiversity. There's a wonderful paper by Alice Vadro and Teresa Choloco that shows clearly that there is a narrative on what we understand about marine biodiversity in the world. And the narrative is as follows. Countries such as Brazil, South Africa, India, China, Russia, the BRICS mainly, we produce a lot of knowledge about biodiversity. We published a lot. There are many, many papers about the biodiversity because we are the hotspots of biodiversity at sea. So it's totally understandable, right? We are not cited. So the papers which are most cited comes from other places in the world which are not the hotspots. So who owns the narrative? Who gets to say what is the discourse around marine biodiversity? It's not us. We don't have a seat in the table. We are in the menu. So thank you, Ghazali, yesterday for saying that. If you're not in the table, you're in the menu. Fabio, don't cut me when I become controversial. I didn't say that. Ghazali yesterday said, if you're not in the table, you're in the menu. I took note of that because that's totally true. So that discourse, that narrative, impacts how things get into the paper. So the climate regime informed most of the BBNJ regime. We haven't had a COP for the ocean, now we do, and that becomes part of the CBD and the UNFCCC. We didn't have a clearinghouse mechanism for the ocean, now we do. Why? Because we're listening and learning from other regimes. But we do have a technology, a marine technology transfer provision in UNCLOS. There's a whole part in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea about technology transfer, but it didn't work. So we should be learning from those processes. Why didn't it work? Why aren't we making an effort to access technology, to spread out? But instead of that, when you go to the clearinghouse mechanism provisions at the BBNJ, it's all about making data accessible. But data from where? Collected by whom? Who owns the technology? Why am I supposed to do the collection myself? So ocean science diplomacy looks at that narrative. Who is dominating the discourse and for which reason? And why is that happening in the world? Because we're not getting anywhere. Things are not getting better. And then we need to drink from the sources of the social sciences, humanities, and applied social sciences. We should not just be looking at the economy, which is super important, but we should be looking at behavioral psychology. We should be looking at groups theory. We should be looking at anthropology, sociology, even philosophy. And we should be asking ourselves, what are the new frameworks that we should be thinking about that are not in place? And rest assured, public opinion matters much, because you get to vote, you get to sit on the table, or you get to be in the menu. So that matters. And if it matters, you matter. If you matter, you have a say. So that's what I think that we should be promoting now. This is the start of something new. I followed BBNJ 20 years of my life. And it was very clear to me that many, many decisions, and the diplomats in the room will forgive me for saying that, but the final decision of the BBNJ came after a whole weekend trapped into a room without air conditioning and translation. So that's people right there. So that's why we have a BBNJ today. Otherwise, we would be discussing it because of who owns the narrative. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Andre. Excellent. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know we're not going to lock you in this room, turn off the air conditioning, and force you to agree to a climate-smart approach. We can do it a different way, hopefully. But I hope you are persuaded, from the speakers, of just how vital this whole aspect of being climate-smart in BBNJ is going to be. We're going to finish off just for time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. I'm not going to ask responses from everybody because we've got a number of speakers. So what I will do is read out a couple of these questions that have come in on Slido, and then whoever wants to jump in, feel free to do that. And any of you who have got burning questions in the room, I can't guarantee we'll get to you, but feel free to stick your hand up as well. So here we go. So the first one, and yes, I thought this one might be asked, and you may all want to answer. What are the most critical scientific gaps that must be addressed in order to support climate-smart implementation of the BBNJ? I'm looking directly at Anna just because she's in my eye line, but do you want to take this one first, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to jump in?
Thank you. I think I mentioned them, but I'm going to start with where Andre left it, which is about the people. So, as you said, I think really well, we have gaps in the evidence, right, in the ABNJ, but we have a lot of data. We have incredible decision support tools, modeling projections, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to get going. So I think where the gap is at the people level, is at the point where we need to persuade the parties that a particular ABNT needs to be put into place, is where we need to make the case that protecting biodiversity in a particular area is also an opportunity in terms of economy, in terms of people. And so we have been also doing a lot of work there in terms, and again, it all comes down to co-development, working hand in hand between science, policy, diplomacy, and that's, I think, where the work needs to go. We need the excellent science, we need the excellence, but we also need to think about these other dimensions of the implementation of the agreement. So that's, I think, what will be key for Climate Smart Pathway.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I think Regina wants to.
Yes, I want to make a parallel to climate and the UNFCCC and what I been following, and extreme events, for instance, on land. And we have the projections, and I've been doing attribution of these extreme events here in Brazil, and every time we have actually the forecast for these extreme events, but what we don't have actually is the policies and this bridging this information to society to make it more resilient and not so vulnerable and exposed. And I see this over and over again, is lack of local data, and this information become actually translated and useful for policymakers, which is the human side of it.
Absolutely, thank you. Did anybody online want to jump in, or shall I move to the next question? I'm just giving you the chance. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Thank you. The next one, and I'll try and I hope I get the meaning of this right. It says, is there potential for any tension between the scale and location of BBNJ ABMTs with and without a climate smart approach? So I don't know if anybody wants to take. Yeah. Is anybody in the room who asked that question wants to elaborate at all, or maybe it came in online? No. So is there potential for tension between the scale and location with and without a climate smart approach of ABM? I mean, the way I'm reading that is, yeah, I mean, is there a difference, kind of, there's a tension between the two approaches, I guess, but.
Without and with climate change, I can't see without, because of we've been talking all week about the fact that that's how climate change will change, spatially where species are and where these protected areas would be, but also tensions in a sense of between countries when these things happen, and we'll just. I don't know. I mean, I'm not too sure if I.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I think that's fine. Unless somebody online wants to.
Yeah. Can I maybe just comment on that one? I think there's always a degree of tension in a sense between, wanting to make sure that we have a protected area in place and understanding exactly where that area is and having it almost sort of fixing it for a certain period, just to be certain that it's there and, to be clear on the rules that are associated with it. And the need to be adaptive and flexible and change things as well in response to a changing environment and to changing dynamics. So I see a conflict maybe between those two requirements, the sort of certainty for stakeholders on the one hand and understanding exactly, the rules that go with an area, and the need to adapt, the need to be flexible.
Excellent, thank you. And I think Christine wanted to come in too.
Yeah, so I wanted to add to that as well. I feel like with our work doing marine spatial planning in the Pacific and conservation planning in the Weddell Sea, it's incorporating climate change forces you to look at a broader perspective. So you might have a local conservation plan, but if you're looking at climate change, which is more of a global, regional problem, you are forced to look at it in a broader perspective. And there might be, as Kira mentioned, like conflicts between looking at the current state and the future state, but obviously you want your marine protected areas or marine spatial plan to be effective for as long as possible. And so that's what I see from the conflict side of things and the space side of things. In the area-based management tools in the high seas, I feel like we have a unique opportunity where we're looking at broad scale conservation. It's not going to be a really small site because we're not looking at a specific nation. But yeah, and this is a really unique opportunity to incorporate climate change in a broad way, I would say.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question, because we'd actually built in some time within this to sort of network and discuss afterwards for those who are able. So I think we'll go for one of the questions that's come in from Slido. Although they're all really good questions, that's the difficulty. We'll see how we get on. So I'm going to ask this one on timeframes. I think it's a really interesting one. So what timeframes need to be taken into account for climate smart decisions, and how much agreement is there on this? I think this is really important, actually, because we keep using the phrase, it's not about now, it's about the future. But what do we mean? Do we mean next year, 5 years, 100 years? So I don't know who wants to go first on the timeframe question. Anybody online want to jump in first? Okay.
Well, perhaps a commentary.
Yep. Go ahead, Fanny. Yes.
Well, I think on timeframes, I think it's both, right? I do think we are always talking about climate change, and we talk a lot about it is in the future, but it is there right now. So I think we need to look at what is there today. I think we need to look at into the future. As I said in my presentation, a critical part is to look at these climate future scenarios and look at 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now. But I think those timeframes, there's different timeframes to look at different things. We are dealing with different timeframes. We're dealing with timeframes within the environment. We're dealing with political timeframes as well, and a lot of those are not matched up at all. So I think when you look at really being successful, you do, of course, and that's a scientific question that's perhaps I'm not the best to answer that, you look at these scientific aspects of what these climate projections are, you determine what needs to be done today, but I think you also, if you want to be successful, look at these political timeframes as well, because ultimately it's, as many people said on this panel, it's ultimately the decision makers that are making things happen, right? Nature is going to take its own course at the end of the day, but whatever we do at the end of the day. But if we want to do the right things, I think there's a lot to say and to think about working in the timeframes politically as well, as much as it is about looking into the future at the climate projections that we need to look at and tackle.
Excellent, thank you. Andre.
I just want to highlight that the beauty of having a COP, finally, because we didn't have how to be, there was no instrument for the flexibility needed for the challenges that we're living so fast, growing so fast. But now we have, at least for the high seas. And that has really worked well for the climate regime, because you can uptake novelties and you can change the course of direction through the COPs, because you make this, diplomats to sit down once a year and discuss about the new upcoming. And so far, under the Convention on the Law of the Sea, we only have the Omnibus Resolution, which is a General Assembly UN thing, and it has been static for the last 30 years. Once a paragraph gets there, it never leaves. So it keeps being repeated, you know, but not at COPs. If you look at climate COPs or biodiversity COPs, Paris Agreement. Who would have thought? The Nagoya Protocol. Who would have thought? And how long did it take for us to have 3 implementing agreements under UNCLOS? One for fish, one for the seabed, and another one for the high seas. So climate is much faster in that sense. So I think that now things will change, and then we can adapt better.
Thank you.
I just want to add an idea. I think it may be one of the ways of resolving this short time versus a long time term, and also this would solve a little bit this fact that is going to move or the places that we should have the MPAs. I think maybe we could have 2 classifications. One is actually permanent MPAs, which then deals with what the conditions that we have now, and maybe some temporary ones. And then we would maybe deal with this problem of moving around, so that would be more settled. And actually thinking about thresholds for defining the MPAs, like I say, and then the climate indicators would come into this, right? So for the permanent ones is what is happening now, and if it's already, like say, with ecosystems that are ready, and say in the edge of a tipping, like corals or regions like that, and that the future says another thing, and then maybe we should protect it or be more, not in a high level but a more temporary areas that could then be changed more, something like that. I don't know.
Excellent. I agree. I totally agree. I mean, Anna, do you want to add to that?
Can I have a final comment?
Yes, yeah. But let's make this final comment, and then we have time to mingle.
So I would just say that on the timelines, it's a really typical question. It's a really important question. And we're going to have to build something about that, some guidance about those considerations if we are serious about making sure that decisions made under the agreement are climate resilient. We need to have some guidance about what type of time horizons do we need to look at. And the experience, again, with this event being about lessons learned, from our experience, what I know from working with practitioners around the world, is that what the future is really different depending on who you ask. And so, for example, with work we've done in Philippines, in Taytay, with community leaders, when we're talking about climate change, for them, you know, it was like 3-4 years because after that it becomes really tenuous, really difficult to perceive. And when we work, for example, with policymakers in the UK, they want to know, they want to really be sure, they need like really long time horizons. They need it now, but they also want to know about the end of the century. And so in the end, it's about who makes the decision and who do they need to answer to. And that needs to provide the diversity that we need to include in that process.
Great, thank you. I think that is a great speech to finish off this, great intervention to finish off the panel, and also to finish off the conference, which has been absolutely fantastic. So it just remains for me to say, once again, thank you to all the conference organisers for allowing us to have this session. Thank you for our amazing panel. Those of you online and in person, thank you all. That was great. We are going to be following up on some of this climate smart and BBNJ stuff in other fora, so kind of watch this space. We're going to take some of this work forward. And most importantly, thank you all for staying till the end when the lovely, glorious sunshine of Rio beckons somewhere. I don't know, apparently somewhere, I don't know where it is. Could I just ask, yes, Hermione, do you want any last words? It feels kind of apt that you have that. And I do think there's some refreshments then outside, but I think I have to give you the last word. It just feels right.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Yeah, back in my happy place. What can I say? Just to thank you, Matt, to thank you, Anna. It's been great to work with you both to arrange this final big satellite event in the main auditorium. As you say, just fabulous to get Andre on the stage. So I think, yeah, we're all pretty relaxed now. And do you want to keep your contributors online? You said you wanted to do a bit of mingling. Do you want to chat or do you want to say?
I imagine they probably want to go off and have a life somewhere.
Well, okay.
I know why. You're welcome to stay.
All right. Well, no, maybe we'll say goodbye to our online panelists and goodbye to anyone still with us online. I think we have had quite a good engagement online. I think we saw that from the Slido questions. So thank you to everybody joining us online for the third BBNJ Symposium. We'll see you next time. And to everyone still here, yes, now let's go and party. Yeah. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
I'm sorry, I didn't know exactly.